Cute and Talk APUSH. We have a new video today. It's the Bee's Knees by the Big Cheese himself, Mr. Lennon Gurr. Let's make history today as we jaw over our Period 1 and 2 review video, which covers Unit 1. But first, let's do our daily punishment. How do you throw a space party? You plan it. Alright, this review video covers Unit 1, which is Native Americans before Columbus and colonial America with the English. On the AP exam, this includes periods 1 and 2. Period 1 is the Native Americans, period 2 is colonial America. I'll give you the dates for both of those as we go along, but this is our Unit 1 / period 1 and 2 review. Alright, so period 1 covers 1491 to 1607. This is 4 to 6% of the exam. You will not see an essay exclusively on this topic. You could see a broad essay that incorporates multiple periods, so maybe like experiences of European countries in America, which would include everything from the Europeans before Columbus to after Columbus to maybe English colonization. Why did we choose 1491 to 1607? 1491 was chosen because it was 1 year before European contact, so we're going to talk about Native American life before Europeans' arrival. 1607 is the first permanent settlement, Jamestown, first English settlement. Much of the focus on this period is on Native American life prior to contact and interactions between Native Americans, Africans, and Europeans. You will see some interactions between the Iberians and the Europeans, like the Columbian Exchange, the Costa system, etc., etc. Let's talk about Native American pre-contact. One of the big things that Native Americans produced is corn or maize. It was grown by Native Americans in the southwest United States and Mexico. It actually did spread. It got all the way to the east coast, the Atlantic seaboard, and parts of Canada. Corn's going to be one of the most nutritious food products they do grow there. In the Great Plains and Great Basin, that's like the center of the United States, there's going to be a lack of resources. This is going to lead to nomadic lifestyles for the Native American tribes. Because of that, a lot of those tribes in the Great Basin and the Great Plains will base their whole lifestyle around hunting things like buffalo, also known as bison. And the buffalo will be really important to them and their lifestyle. In the northwestern United States, they hunted, fished, and foraged. Here's a little picture of different Native American areas, which we've talked about before. In the northeastern United States, they had a mix of agriculture and hunting. So we talked about the Columbian Exchange before. It's the exchange of good ideas, diseases, and people between Europe, Africa, and America. A big example of that is from Europe, the Europeans came, the Iberians came, they brought smallpox with them. Smallpox are going to come to America. Smallpox will kill around 90% of the Native Americans in the Americas. It's going to decimate the Native American population, almost wipe them out. Guns and horses will also come from Europe to America. It's going to transform their lifestyle and their war style. Eventually, there is going to be some interbreeding, mixing of races between the Iberians, mostly the Spanish, and the Native Americans. This will create a racially mixed system called the Costa system. An example of this is mestizos. How will this affect Europe? You're going to have some food products that are going to go from America to Europe. The two biggest examples of this are maize, so corn, and potatoes. This is going to lead to larger population growth. Eventually, you're going to have like joint stock companies being formed in the Americas. This is going to help lead to capitalism developing in Europe, mostly northwestern countries like in England, the Netherlands. They're going to really start to develop capitalism. And how is this going to impact Africa? Well, the answer for that is going to be the slave trade. At first, the Iberians will use Native Americans as slaves, but the Native Americans will die. It's also easier for them to escape. So the Portuguese are going to start importing African slaves from West Africa. This is going to lead to the Middle Passage, where the African slaves are shipped from Africa to America. It's the whole triangular, it's the whole Atlantic slave trade. And then they make raw products that get sent back to Europe. They used that wealth to buy the slaves, the whole triangular trade. Let's talk about some of the European exploration goals and technology. One of the big reasons that Europeans are going to be able to explore and get to the New World is because of technological improvements that will help them promote contact and trade. So we have the sextant, the astrolabe, the caravel, the carrack. There's new mapping techniques, the Volta de Mar, which was like a wind pattern they discovered. The English are going to start using joint stock companies, although the French and the Dutch will do this also. Joint stock companies are when groups of people put in money, they get a charter from the king, they form a colony, and they get to keep a profit of it. So this is really what is going to help lead to capitalism. Some of the big reasons for exploration, it does vary, but in general, it is the 3 Gs, gold, God, and glory. You see gold early on a lot with the Spanish and Portuguese, although they will send Catholic missionaries there as well. So the Spanish were pretty interested in all 3 of these things. When you get to groups like the Puritans and Pilgrims, very much God motivated them. When you get to like Jamestown, it was mostly about trying to find gold. So it does vary. Let's talk about the transformation of the Americas. How is the impact of Spanish contact going to impact the Americas? You're going to have a new racially mixed casta system. You have mestizos, which is a mix of Spanish and Native American ancestry. The mulattoes, which is a mix of Spanish and African ancestry. You also have things like the zombos, which was African and Native American. At the very top, you have the peninsulares, the Europeans born in Europe. Then the Creoles, the Europeans born in America. One of the other big things that transforms the Americas, which is often on the exam, is the encomienda system. The encomienda system was where the Spanish government gave royal grants of land to Spaniards. The Spaniards would get the land as long as they promised to Christianize the Native Americans. They gained tribute, and they basically used the Native Americans as slaves. We talked about this before. It's basically pseudo-slavery. It's a way that the Spanish were able to justify enslaving the Native Americans that, oh, we're teaching them Christianity. Eventually, this system will be replaced by African slavery, but the encomienda system is pretty important. There is going to be debate over treatment of the Native Americans. You have Bartolomé de las Casas, who is a Catholic bishop who went to the New World, who was horrified in what he saw was happening to them. He thought what they were doing was wrong and went against religion. The person that's going to go against him is Sepulveda, who we'll talk about in a second. There will be conflict with the Native Americans. Europeans will seek to change Native Americans' way of life by creating missionaries, by going to war with them. A lot of Native Americans will try to preserve autonomy. Africans will attempt to adapt to the Western Hemisphere. They'll seek to preserve as much autonomy as they can. They will combine Christianity with African religions. We talked about maroon communities before. This was made up of runaway slaves where they formed groups in parts of the Caribbean. A lot of the maroon communities were in the Caribbean, but a maroon community is anywhere where Africans escaped chattel slavery and moved usually to the mountains to form their own communities. So you could hypothetically have maroon communities in South America, which you did have. You could have maroon communities in North America, although that happened a lot less often. Let's talk about some of the key people from period 1. These are people that have been on the test before. Juan de Sepulveda. He was the one person that advocated for harsh treatment of Native Americans. He was de las Casas' enemy, both priests. He claimed slavery for Native Americans was justified under Christianity. Bartolomé de las Casas. He argued Native Americans deserve the same treatment as other men. He's going to really argue to the king and queen of Spain to try to get them to stop what they're doing to the Native Americans. He's going to help end the encomienda system. All right, kiddos. We're starting the next part of this video. This is period 2, which is still unit 1 in our review. Period 2 is 1607 to 1754. Wait, was that Henry Clay? Let's see. Well, that was Henry Clay. What is he doing here? He's not even born yet. Oh my God. All right. Period 2 is roughly 6 to 8% of the exam. Some of the essays it could include are comparing and contrasting European powers, characteristics of British colonial rule, taxation policy, mercantile system. Why did we choose 1607 to 1754 as the dates? 1607 was the first permanent English settlement, Jamestown. 1754 is right before the French and Indian War. So this time period will continue to focus on European colonization, with England representing a significant amount of focus. Really, other than talking about France a little bit, England's the major colonial power we'll be talking about for this unit, for this period. And remember, period 1 and 2 equal the unit 1 that we covered earlier on. They're both a little bit smaller. All right. Just as a little refresher, let's talk about some of the goals of the European powers. The Spanish will want tighter control. They'll seek to convert the Native Americans and gain gold. The Dutch and French are both going to send fewer settlements. The French will colonize Quebec, parts of Canada, and parts of Louisiana, like even parts of Texas and stuff, but they have really smaller settlements. Mostly they're interested in establishing trade relationships with the Native Americans. They would often intermarry and traded furs. Really, if we're talking about which one of these was the most, that had the best relationships with the Native Americans, it is the French. The Dutch still had pretty bad relationships with them. They just were more interested in trade, but they were not as benign as the French. The English will heavily colonize to heavily rely on agriculture. Remember, they find tobacco. They find a way to grow tobacco in Jamestown in Virginia. Many women and men will populate the colonies. They're often going to have hostile relationships with the Native Americans, which will lead to war. Let's talk specifically about the British colonies. The British colonies will rarely intermarry with the Native Americans and Africans. They're going to have a more rigid social hierarchy. The Atlantic slave trade is going to be caused by the idea of racial superiority, lack of indentured servants. Remember, after Bacon's rebellion, the white elites in Jamestown are afraid to use indentured servants anymore. So in the English colonies, at least, they're going to start switching to African slavery in the late 1600s, early 1700s. Native Americans were harder to enslave. They were easier to escape. They died more often because of their lack of immunity to European diseases and demand for European goods. Europe's demand for goods. How is this going to, what's going to be the impact of African slavery? There's going to be a desire for more land, which is going to lead to wars with Native Americans. The Pequot War, King Philip's War, the Powhatan Wars, a lot of them. Africans will use covert and other overt ways of resistance. So there will be slave rebellions. The first one is the Stono Rebellion in 1750, which happened in South Carolina, where some African slaves did rebel. There will be other rebellions as well that African slaves will do. There's also just like covert ways, like just like working slowly, breaking the equipment, stuff like that. So let's talk about the different types of colonies for the English colonies. We have the New England colonies. This was established by the Puritans. It was homogeneous, like-minded communities. They based their beliefs off of a very rigid view of Calvinism, double predestination. They had a mix of agriculture and commerce. They were the most commercial-based ones. You have the middle colonies. They were the breadbasket colonies, quote unquote. They produced cereal crops. They were religiously and demographically and ethnically diverse. Middle colonies is mostly New York and Pennsylvania, and a little bit of Delaware and New Jersey. Then you have the Chesapeake colonies, which is part of the South, but it's kind of a sub-region in the South. The Chesapeake colonies were Maryland and Virginia. They grew on tobacco. They relied on indentured servants and later African slaves. They were the first colonies to be colonized. Then you have the Southern colonies and the West Indies. They grew staple crops like sugar. Later, they used things like tobacco. Much later, in the early 1800s, they grew cotton. Africans will make up a majority of the populations in some of these areas. In some of these southern colonies, up to like 50% of the population were slaves. What was that? Oh, that was the Pueblo Revolt. We'll talk at least about one revolt, which has been on the exam before. This is the Pueblo Revolt. The Pueblo Revolt was a Native American rebellion in the southwestern portion of the United States. The Spanish were seeking to end the Native American practices that were inconsistent with Christianity. The Pueblos are going to rebel. They're going to destroy all the Christian churches in the New Mexico, Arizona area. They're going to expel the Spanish for the next 10 years. Eventually, the Spanish will regain control, and they're going to advocate religious assimilation of the natives. So they will allow some of the Native American beliefs in on the DL. Let's talk about Anglicization of the British colonies. This is where the colonies are becoming more and more British, where the colonies are becoming like, sometimes we use the word Neo-Europas, but they're taking on British characteristics. You see these a lot in the 13 colonies. You're going to see this through things like the transatlantic print culture, commercial ties, etc. When people move to the 13 colonies, they don't forget the fact they're English. They still try to keep in contact with the English and what's going on there, and they still try to keep in contact with what's going on with the customs and cultures there. Some of the other big things during this time is the Enlightenment. This is a new intellectual movement in the early 1700s. This focused on reason and intelligence, and using reason to solve the world problems. Individuals will begin to question forms of government. The Enlightenment is going to be important because of some of the philosophers, some of the philosophers, and their ideas on government. Montesquieu came up with the idea of the separation of powers for branches of government. Locke came up with the idea of the social contract, the idea that you're part of the government, you give up your rights, but in return the government promises to protect your natural rights. If the government denies that, you have a right to rebel. Also Rousseau, popular sovereignty, Voltaire, freedom of religion. Another big idea which is going to cause a lot of problems later on is mercantilism. Mercantilism is the goal is to make money for the mother country. The colonies are used for their raw resources. Those raw resources are shipped in the mother country. You don't want the colonies to create their own industries because you want the colonies just to be producing raw resources. It is exploitative to the colonies, and it is going to cause resentment, which is going to be one of the things that leads to the American Revolution. You also want to get gold and silver. Let's talk about British colonial relationships in this time. They did have similar laws, cultures, and institutions in government within the British colonies. The colonies had like different types of colonial governments. They had joint stock governments, they had proprietor, and they had royal colonies. But even when they came to the New World, they did create like a legislative branch, like the Virginia House of Burgesses. They created constitutions. They took a lot from Britain. Britain will seek to maintain mercantilist policies, making money for the mother country. However, this will not always be successful. Colonies were able to resist this through smuggling. After the Dominion of New England, which we talked about before, the British are going to kind of leave the colonies alone, and they're not going to try to enforce the Navigation Acts. This is going to lead to a period of salutary neglect, which lasts until the French and Indian War, where Britain doesn't really try to force these mercantile policies on the colonies. What are some of the colonial arguments for resistance? They have self-government. They don't have representation. They took the ideas of the Enlightenment, and they felt like they want a government based on the ideas of the Enlightenment and individual freedom. They want religious independence and diversity. In England, the official church is the Anglican Church. Remember, in New England, they're all Puritans and Pilgrims, so they do not like Anglicanism. In the South, they are mostly Anglican, but like even in the South, they want more religious freedom. They don't want an established church. And there is this perception amongst the colonies that the British government is corrupt, which is true, but all governments are. Let's talk about some of the key people from this time period, kiddos. We have the New England colonies. That's a concept, not a person. In the New England colonies, we have John Winthrop. He was the governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony, which is the first real successful colony in New England. He's the one that did the City on the Hill speech. We have Roger Williams. He's going to be kicked out of Massachusetts Bay. He believed in religious freedom. He's going to create the colony of Rhode Island and push for religious toleration. We have Anne Hutchinson. She's going to challenge the gender norms of Massachusetts Bay. She leads Bible studies herself. Oh my God. And she's going to be banished to Rhode Island while pregnant. We have William Penn in the middle colonies. He's going to be given a group of land. He's going to be given some land by the king. He was a proprietor colony. He'll found Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is going to be religiously tolerant, ethnically diverse, and it's trying to have good relationships with the Native Americans. Other people, from the Enlightenment, we have John Locke. He came up with the idea of natural rights. He's going to inspire the ideas of the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson will rip off some ideas from him. From the First Great Awakening, we have Jonathan Edwards. He started the First Great Awakening. The First Great Awakening was kind of, people were upset with how stale the religion had got in colonial New England after things like the Hathaway Covenant. So there is going to be a more mass movement for religion where like you have these preachers and they try to use emotion to convert people. A lot of the more conservative religious leaders don't like this because they feel like their power base is threatened. This is where you get the old lights, the people that are against the First Great Awakening, and the new lights, the people that use this new emotional style. Jonathan Edwards said, "Sinners in the hands of an angry God." Why do you think I put him up there? Let's see if anybody knows. George Whitefield, he's another great orator from the First Great Awakening. And that is all I have for you for today, kiddos. Dun, dun, dun. You can still hear my voice, though. Until next time, deuces, 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 yeah.